The IPS Academy provides online courses from some of the best instructors out there on mental health, personal development, lifestyle, nutrition, relationships, mindfulness, improving your life quality, etc. Each course we offer has been made in collaboration with an instructor who has also been a guest here on the Inner Picture Stories podcast. Have a look to see if there's a course to your liking, read the full course descriptions, and check out the thousands of positive reviews from students who have taken the course by going to innerpicturestories.com/academy. With that, let's dig into the interview. Welcome to the Inner Picture Stories podcast. My name is Jellis Vaas, your host and the founder of Inner Picture Stories, the educational platform on life. I hereby invite you to come on a journey with me. In each episode, we will dive into the life of an inspiring person seeking lessons of wisdom about life and the world we live in. Answers that you can take away and use in your own life. It's true that no one ever said life would be easy, but it's also true that no one ever said you had to do it alone. So get ready and let the journey begin.
In the monastery, you're always in some kind of a situation where you get pressured, so that under that pressure, your worst qualities will come up. And you actually want that to happen so that you can deal with those worst qualities. Awareness can be controlled by the world, or you can be in control of awareness. So you have the choice.
Exactly.
Who's in control? That's the question to keep asking yourself.
This is episode 006 with Muni Natarajan. Welcome to the Inner Picture Stories podcast. This is your host, Jellis Vaas, speaking. And great to have you listening. And thanks for spending some time with me and our guest today, Muni Natarajan, an ex-monk who lived for 37 years in the monastery. Yes, 37 years. Before I talk more about the interview I did with Muni, I would just like to give a quick thank you to someone who was kind enough to write us a 5-star review. This is from Ryan, who wrote, "Thanks for putting this out there, very well done, full of useful stuff that I'm going to use in my own life. Keep doing the good work." Many thanks for that, Ryan. It means a lot to me to hear those words, and we will definitely keep doing our best to find inspiring and fascinating people, in fact, just like our following guest, Muni Natarajan. Ever since I created this podcast, I've been looking forward to speaking with Muni. This was just such a fun and fascinating interview to do, and I was able to dig deep into Muni's story of why he became a monk at the age of 20 years old, what life was like in the monastery, lessons that his teachers taught him, the hardest thing he ever had to do in the monastery, the meaning behind meditation, why he eventually left, what the hardest thing was adjusting to life outside of the monastery, and so many more interesting topics besides. There are some small connection issues in the interview, so I apologize for that. However, they are nothing major and certainly don't detract from the power of this fascinating interview. So, without further ado, I give you the one and only Muni Natarajan, the silent dancer. Yeah, I wish my name meant something as cool as that. Please enjoy. Muni, welcome to the show, and very honored to have you here. We met on the Swiss Alp riding retreat from Deborah, who I had on a previous episode here as well. And you were one of the teachers there on meditation and yoga. And even though I already did back then ask you quite a few questions, I still felt there were just so many more I wanted to ask you. So hereby my chance to do that. Before we'll dig into the main subject of the show, I'd just like to start with a couple of starting questions that I ask all my guests here to get a bit warmed up. And the first one is, do you have any morning routines, Muni, that you feel contribute to your happiness, or something that you do in the morning that helps you start your day off on the right note?
Yes, I do. And I think that's really an important thing to emphasize in the practice of yoga in general, is to have some kind of a daily practice, which I do have. And it's basically following the routine that I followed in the monastery, which was to get up. In my case, I get up at 3 a.m, not by an alarm clock, but just by
Wow.
just by habit. You get up at 3 and end at 7. So it's basically a 4-hour session for myself. And that gets me ready for the day. And then what I do, is give classes during the day. So, and it's based on that, good start in the morning. And it really is very important to do something every day if you're really serious about the yoking of yoga, which is the ultimate ultimate practice of meditation is to yoke awareness within, from the outside in, and that's done first, best in the morning, and getting off to a good start. And then whatever you do the rest of the day is best done with a good start like that.
What time do you go to bed then?
About 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock?
That's hard because my last class ends about 8:30, so that's a big challenge.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, 3 a.m. My sleep cycle, I go to bed at 6 a.m. and I stand up at 1 p.m.
Yeah, but it's relative, it's relative. You can adjust the time to your schedule.
Yeah, exactly. It just works more for me. And next question here. What do you think is the cause of unhappiness in most people?
Well, I think that's a misallocation of who the identity. I mean, who is the person that's unhappy? If you can kind of trace that out to the source. And my book, I entitled my first book, Into the Eye of All. The eye that I'm talking about is the eye that we all share, that's deep within, that's never unhappy. So the yoking of yoga is all about getting back to that eye. And all of our problems really are caused by misappropriating our sense of I. We get the I put in the wrong place. If we get out there in the ego, then we're sitting duck for unhappiness. We're just looking for trouble. And so the main name of the game of the yoking of yoga is to yoke awareness back from the outside into the inner eye that we all share, this deep inner eye that's always happy, that's always blissful. Blissful by nature. I mean, it doesn't have to be made blissful. It is that way already. It's just covered up by all the stuff that we go through in life. And basically the process of this yoking of yoga, the way it's taught in ancient times, is basically uncovering what's already there. We're not trying to create something that's not there. It's already there. And unhappiness is just being separated from that happiness. That's our birthright.
Yeah, that's true.
If that makes sense. So we're not trying to create something. We're trying to uncover something that's already there.
Does make a lot of sense. Yeah. Appreciation, Muni. What do you do to remind yourself of your appreciation of life?
Well, I appreciate my teacher every day in my life because he changed my life for the better, and he taught me the way to happiness in a sense. It's kind of like The Wizard of Oz. Have you seen that movie, The Wizard of Oz, or you know the story?
I've seen that a long time ago, but I know, yeah.
Yeah, he taught me, he gave me the idea of the yellow brick road from the outside to the end, and I've been following that for 45 years now. So I have everyday appreciation for that, for him, but I also have appreciation for all the good things in my life, all the good influences in my life, which come to me every day because of what I initiate in the way that I work with life, knowing what I know about life and how life works, in terms of creating good instead of bad karma. Then I have appreciation for the fact that the law of karma is the abiding law that we all live by, whether we know it or not. And we have to suffer the consequence of karma if it's bad and enjoy the consequence of that if it's good karma. So I try to live by that law of karma and have feel gratification day by day for that law. It's the infallible law of existence that governs everything and by which we all live, whether we know it or not. And that's what I feel gratitude for. Gratitude is really important because it keeps you humble. And humility, that's a really important thing, is humility. If you think you know it all, if you think people should be thanking you instead you thanking people, then you got it backwards.
Muni, with that question, I want to move over to the main subject of the show, why I wanted to have you here. And I want to dig within your inner wisdom because you have lived quite a fascinating life to me, because you were a monk for 37 years, which is just incredible. And I want to talk a bit about your time in a monastery and about being a monk, and also about the lessons you've come to learn so far about this life and about yourself. I like to start here with this question, as it was quite surprising for me when I heard it. But before you joined the monastery, you were a professional jazz drummer in a band. Could you just tell us a bit more about that time and how you were back then, as it's a very different lifestyle?
Yes, it was very different, but it was because of that lifestyle that I got turned within, I would say, because, it gave me a good, quick glimpse of what it would be like if I stayed out there, and I knew that not the life for me. Although I enjoyed music, and I still do, I still play drums, but in a different way. but being out there on the road, especially on the road, means you're on a bus and you're traveling from place to place, and you're playing every night in a different place, and you're on the road almost constantly. That's you see a glimpse into the lifestyle that yields, and nobody can avoid it, really. If you're in that lifestyle, even if you don't want to be in that lifestyle, you are. And there's a lot of drugs and alcohol and so forth. So I got a really quick glimpse of that, and I said, no, this is not for me. And it was almost that kind of shock that impelled me into a spiritual life, which impelled me into the monastery for other reasons, but that was the primary reason. I got a good, hard glimpse of what it could be what life could be out there. And I didn't want that. And I could see that I didn't want that. And I had to have that experience to show me that I really didn't want that. I wanted something else.
How old were you when you started playing professionally?
Oh, 15.
15?
Oh, yeah. When I was still in high school, I was making money playing drums.
That's awesome.
I started playing drums and, piano and drums and music training when I was 6 years old. So music has been a big part of my life, all my life, still to this day.
Yeah, I know that, well, drums I do know, but piano you play as well?
Oh, yes.
Cool, that's awesome. That's cool. What was actually the age when you decided to join the monastery?
Well, I learned about my teachers, training and teaching while I was still in college, and basically 3 or 4 years before I actually joined the monastery, and I worked my way as a working musician across the country and over into California and into Hawaii, where he just established his monastery in Kauai, Hawaii. And I worked there with Don Ho, who's a well-known musician on Oahu, the main island in the Hawaiian chain, and all of his, I was his house drummer, so to speak. And from there, I was able to get into the monastery. So I entered the monastery at the age of 20, but I learned about my teacher's teachings and read his books and heard him online, and well, it was before internet, but maybe 67, 68, right in there. I entered the monastery in 1970, and I was there for 37 years.
That's incredible, because you were so young that you already, you already kind of explained that you had a glimpse from being a professional jazz musician and being on the road, like what the lifestyle could be of that. Mm-hmm. But being so young and then deciding to go into the monastery, that came from having that glimpse and from seeing about your teachers, what they did with their life?
Yeah, kind of. That's to a certain extent, that's true. But, there's also, that was the late 60s, and the 60s where, psychedelic drugs were coming out and everybody was thinking about inner life and transformative experiences. And they were thinking about, how can I do this for myself? And they were looking within. It was a special time, actually, say what you will about drugs. I mean, drugs are not good. I'm not trying to fortify that mindset at all, but that was a changing time. It was a period of change from the 50s to the 60s into the 70s, where people are really opening up their minds, and drugs were a part of that, and that influenced the culture, whether or not you took drugs. So it was kind of a sign of the times. In addition to my own experience with, working as a professional musician, I kind of came to realize that there's more. There's something more here, and I was unhappy, like everybody's unhappy in some way. And that discontent is what drives you within. And so I tried to use that to my advantage, especially when I got the glimpse of my teacher's teachings through, I learned about him through people who knew him. I didn't meet him until about 2 to 3 years after I'd heard about him. But it was a combination of a confluence of a lot of different things that came together all at one psychological time that was really important for me. And, who can say why you do what you do? But those are some of the influences that played upon me at that time. So
the first few days in the monastery, wasn't it quite difficult in the beginning? Because leaving your old life, your family, your old habits and friends behind must have provoked some thoughts within you, right? Can you still recall how you felt the first months being in the monastery?
Very difficult. Very difficult. Yeah. Everything was in a big adjustment in diet and lifestyle and everything. I mean, immediately you had to get up early and spend your whole day. And, you think in the monastery everybody's just sitting around, but no, that's not true. Really, you're quite busy all day long. You have a very busy schedule. It's like the military in a certain way.
Yeah.
And you have no real privacy. That was the biggest thing that I had to adjust to. You don't have any alone time. And even
do you not?
No, you don't. I mean, even when I came into the monastery, even then it's different now, but then, even sleeping, there were like 5 people to a room. And you have no privacy. Everybody gets up at the same time. Everybody goes to the work. They follow the same schedule all day long. And they go, like, our first 4 hours is group sadhana. Sadhana means spiritual practice. So we all did that together. You have no choice, You just have to go along, and you have breakfast, and you have an 8-hour job. Each one of us had an 8-hour job in the monastery, and my job was in the press shop. And then in the evenings, you have class. And then all through the day, your teacher comes around and pulls you off to the side and gives you personal instruction in addition to the group study that we all did together. So it was all work together. It's kind of a very intense day-to-day ongoing grilling, in a sense. It's just get up in the morning and you go through the same routine every day, more or less. But you did have a retreat time, which is more or less like a weekend. But during the retreat, you still work, but you just do something different. So the idea of relaxation was to do something different. You still do something. And all of it's geared toward inner life, and all of it's under scrutiny by the teacher, and the teacher is taking advantage of every situation that came up to teach you something new. So that's the big value of living in a monastery as opposed to living out in the world. I mean, every experience that you have is under the scrutiny of the teacher, and the teacher uses that experience to teach you something through life, not through just intellect, not through just learning something from a book. It's like learning it through experience. He makes sure that it goes home for you individually by checking up on you and being right there, every moment. So
you told me that when you join the monastery, you need to give up your name and that you're given a new name. And just out of curiosity, what was your birth name?
Philip Johnson.
Wow, that's very different.
It's interesting that you should ask that, because I've just gone through a long ordeal getting my birth certificate so I can get, certain benefits that come to me because of my birth name. Mm-hmm. I had to go through a long routine to get that reestablished because I have no record of anything but Muni Natarajan, which is a name that I legally became in 1970. Yeah. It's a legal name. Muni Natarajan now is my legal name. In other words, it's on my driver's license, my passport.
The monks give you a new name, right?
My teacher did.
Okay, and how do they decide upon your new name? Is there like a reason behind it?
Oh, he gives you like 5 suggestions, and he makes those suggestions based on his understanding of you and how he perceives you to be. So in my case, Muni means the one that never talks. So when I was young, I didn't talk nearly as much as I do now, and even now I don't talk that much unless I'm being asked something.
Like right now.
Right now. But then Natarajan means the dancer. So he gave me that suggestion as a name because I was all into music. My whole life was music up until that point. So Siva is the dancer, and that's what Nataraja is. So my name is Muni Natarajan.
That's a cool.
So the one who never speaks but dances. That's basically.
Yeah. A regular day in a monastery, Muni. Could you give us, you already did a little bit, but could you give us like a little tour how a regular day in the monastery looked like?
Yeah, I did already to a certain extent. You're encouraged to get up at 3, but the day officially starts at 4 with a big ceremony in our main temple. We have several temples. There's a main temple where you go through a ceremony. It's like a Buddhist Hindu kind of ceremony that lasts for about an hour.
Is that at 3 or is that at 4?
That's at 4 o'clock.
Okay.
You get up at 3 in the morning. What you're supposed to do is get up at 3 in the morning, take a shower, get cleaned up, and do hatha yoga, which is the physical yoga, for about a half an hour at least before you go to the temple. That's what you're supposed to do. Now, nobody governs that, so each monk is on his own to do that. But to do that, you really have to get up at 3, and then there's kind of a fight for the showers. I say fight in the sense that we only have 4 showers for 30 months, So
you have to wait in line.
You have to wait in line or figure out when to get there so you don't have to wait in line. It's it's like really very much like life in a very large family.
Yeah.
And everybody has, and that's good. That's part of the training, because you have to be, you have to be humble. You have to be a lot of gratitude for everything that you get, and it's like being a part of a very large family. You have to give more than you take, and that's part of the training. So that's part of, you take a shower when you can, and you get to the temple. If you're 1 minute late to the temple, that's really not good, because then your whole day changes. That means you have to do something different all day long than what you're normally slated to do, and that can be an encumbrance. That can be difficult, because in my case, I worked in the press shop, and we had deadlines in the press shop for when we had to produce printed material. So if you're late in the morning, even by 30 seconds to the temple, then you have to work outside in a different kulam. Kulam means family, a different group of people, of monks. And you can't meet your goals, your daily goals. And so that makes your life very difficult by just by being late by 30 seconds, to your morning puja. So it's very strong impetus to get there on time. And then that puja lasts for about an hour. You come around to the Guru temple, a different temple. That's where you're sitting with your teacher and you do a group meditation for about 45 minutes. He talks after that for about 50 minutes or half an hour, takes questions and answers. And then we make it a study time or, a practical time where you have a chance to ask your teachers about problems that you've had or solutions that you're looking for or questions that you'd like to have answers to. And that's his chance to talk with the group in general about the general things that come up during the day for the monks. Then apart from that, you have times during the day from when you can talk to your teacher personally, and that's when your private time. But then after that, you have a period of time where the teacher actually leads you through some hatha yoga and some dance and some physical exercise. He was a professional dancer. Our teacher was before. He was and he studied in India Kartak dancing, which is an Indian style of dancing. So we all learned that, and that was very good physical exercise, along with yoga, which is a physical yoga. We do that for about half an hour, 45 minutes, and all of that together completed about 4 hours from 3 to 7 o'clock in the morning. But 4 to 7 is 3 hours of group participation. You get your breakfast and a kind of a buffet situation, and you take the breakfast on your plate to a morning meeting with your kulam. Kulam means family, and your family is the monastic group that does the particular work that you do in the monastery. There are 5 different families. I was in the publications family called the Ganpati Kulam, and we had a morning meeting while we ate breakfast, and that morning meeting started at 8 o'clock and ended about 8:30, and then we did 8 hours of work. And then at the end of the day, you have classes and satsang. Satsang means a meeting with the Guru, your teacher, before you go to bed, and you go to bed at 9 o'clock, get up in the morning and do the same thing. There's a grind. It's like the military,
Yeah, it is. Just with a different purpose behind it then, but yeah.
That's right.
From those 37 years in the monastery, Muni, what are some life-changing lessons your teachers have taught you?
That would be a different answer for different people. But if you're asking me, then the changes that happened to me, they happen, gradually over time, and it very much happens in the now as things come up. And the big advantage of living in the monastery is kind of like a hotbed situation, like a greenhouse for growth, in a sense, where you have a chance to accelerate what's going to happen anyway. Life is your teacher no matter what. You can't have an experience that doesn't teach you something. So that's the basic law of life. Even if it's a bad lesson, you're going to learn something, right? And some people learn slowly and some people learn quickly, from the lessons of life. So
if you look upon it that you can learn from life, then it's going to come faster.
That's right. And so the monastery life is just kind of a hotbed for that to happen more quickly, especially since the Guru is right there over your shoulder looking and saying, look, what did you learn from that? And we had a law, for instance, that just to give you an example, that you couldn't go to bed. If you had a disagreement with a monk, you couldn't go to bed until you iron that out with a third person present. So, if you had a disagreement with, like in the monastery, you're always in some kind of a situation where you get pressured, so that under that pressure, your worst qualities will come up. And you actually want that to happen so that you can deal with those worst qualities and actually progress in your life. It's a way of transforming your life from the inside out on purpose, intentionally, by having these situations come up in this hotbed monastery situation where you can't get around having to face yourself. And facing yourself is a big part of what we do, and it's different for each person because each person has a different self to face before they get to the self that we all share. That's the idea. And meanwhile, you got your teacher right over your shoulder kind of helping you through the whole process. And part of that, as an example, is if you have a situation coming up, you can't go to bed until you iron that situation out with that person that you've had a disagreement or whatever. And the third person has to be present to confirm that discontent has been resolved and you can go to bed. It may take hours, but it has to happen. That's part of the training.
That's all about communication, and that's so important.
Yes, communication's a big deal.
Yeah, and that's where so many in relationships or something, where a lot of problems come from, just not sitting down and actually communicating about the problem that you're having.
Absolutely.
What was something life-changing that you discovered about yourself during those years?
It's a series of different things, and it's a very gradual breakdown of the ego. Mm-hmm. I would say from the outside in, because each one of us comes into the monastery, each one of the monks came into the monastery with a certain perception of who they thought they were, which is basically some sense of ego, which is very important because you have to have a powerful, very stable sense of who you are to function well in the world, and that's very important. But in the monastery, you don't need that so much. So you're given, that's one of the big advantages of coming into the monastery, you're allowed this opportunity to allow the ego to break down piece by piece by piece. And for each person, that's something different. So through the years, my ego got hammered down, little by little by little. I don't mean that to sound like it's a forceful thing. It just came about through different experiences of life coming up and having to deal with the teachings in the context of experience, which through that experience allowed the ego to get humiliated. There's no better teaching of humility than humiliation, right?
That's true.
You think back on your own life, you by being humiliated, you learned about humility. It's
Sure.
like, to take that one step further, by all the people that I've observed that have really gone in and had this life transformative experience from the inside out, they've gotten there not by choice, but by the hardships of life had pressured them in, so that
Exactly.
they have no other place to go but inside themselves. They've tried everything. They may try drugs and alcohol and relationships, whatever. They try all these different things, and they said, look, nothing works. I'm still unhappy. What do I do? And, as a last resort, they try this yoking of yoga, and to whatever extent they stay with it, they gain some access to the inside of themselves, which is always blissful by nature, because it's the nature of our deep inner nature to be blissful by nature. So that's where we're headed. That's where we go. That's what we uncover. We don't create something that's not already there. It's already there to be discovered. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of staying with it. And that comes down to focus, just hanging in.
And that's the whole problem. What I see a lot here, it's so easy to get distracted today with social media, internet. It's so easy to lay your focus from within you to the outside. And if you can take the time to actually just look within you and then kind of keep looking within you, you're not going to discover who you are. And many people are always putting their attention away from themselves because it's so easy to distract yourself.
Right, you're right. And social media is the new challenge, but there's always been something,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But you're absolutely right. And for people, I have a lot of people that come to class, they say, I have no time, to do. But if you really want, desire is a lead horse in life.
Yeah.
If you have 1 second, you're going to use that second to do what you really want to do.
Exactly.
So, if you have to really be honest with yourself. Desire is a lead horse. And so once your desire gets transmuted up to a point, transmutation means transform upwards, bringing your desire up to a high point where you're really wanting something. And usually this happens out of desperation. You're really unhappy and you're just desperate. You've tried everything. And then finally you say, look, I really need this. And that's an intense desire on a high level to go within. And that's what really makes it happen. And that doesn't mean time necessarily. So if you really have a strong desire, you will make time. But even if you don't have time, if you really are busy, there is another way. I mean, you can do this. In fact, the most efficient way to practice yoga is during the day, during all of your experiences during the day. I mean, if you look at your life, there's a process of meditation now called vipassana or mindfulness. That's a beautiful, beautiful system. And that's most easily and most expeditiously practiced during the day, not during meditation. So like when you're driving down the street, I mean, your mind can be off in the grocery store, buying lettuce for dinner tonight, or it can be right on what you can now. And so that means you can actually practice your meditation during the day. That's actually much more efficient than setting aside a particular time to practice meditation. It's almost like setting aside time to meditate is a rehearsal for the day. And the most important part is working during the day.
I think it's fun. Many people do complain that they have a lack of time.
Yeah.
But I think it's more when you say that means
the lack of desire.
Yeah, also. But
it.
Also being unaware of where your time is going, because everyone has time.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
It's more about being aware where your time is going, because a lot of people are wasting their time on going on social media.
Absolutely.
It's something that I see a lot. Here are just a couple of short questions out of curiosity about life in the monastery. Did you had any free days in the monastery? Like, did you had the weekends off, or were there any free days?
We worked on a moon calendar, which is slightly different than the calendar that we're most acquainted with. Mm-hmm. It's a moon calendar, so the full moon determines what we call a retreat time. And during that retreat, it can be like 1, 2, or 3, or 4, even 4 days sometimes, which is all determined by the full moon. So we do have a retreat time. And during that time, instead of just recreation, we have release from our work responsibilities, which is a tremendous relaxation in itself.
Sure.
But during that time, we focus more on inner pursuits. We have long meditations, and we have longer times of talking with our teacher, and we have special events where we go out. Sometimes we go out camping.
Camping?
Camping. And on Kauai, the island that we're on, we have a kind of a mountainous area, and then we go down to the beach. And it's
a good place to camp there.
Oh, yeah. And we go down to the beach, and we set up camp, and we around a campfire that's really fun. And we go up in the mountains. So we'll spend like on a long 3-day retreat. We'll spend 2 nights out camping and hiking up in the mountains. And it's a way of getting back into nature. Getting back into nature, you just can't beat that. Nature is a wonderful teacher.
It's amazing, yeah.
So we do have, to answer your question, we do have a retreat time, but the retreat time is not wasted time. It's and it couldn't even be called recreation, except for the fact that we do enjoy camaraderie that we don't usually have in the monastery. I mean, you might think that we're living shoulder to shoulder, 30 monks living together and sharing space and food and everything. We really don't communicate that much with each other. We're so busy with our schedules. And so retreats are a chance to do that. And so we have a wonderful time together. We surf, go out and surf. We have a surfboard and hike up in the mountains, and we play volleyball.
Oh, you surf, you said?
Oh, yeah, we surf.
Oh, cool.
We have a surfboard. But I can't call us, we can't say we're surfing experts, but after 37 years of doing that every retreat, I'm pretty good.
That's cool. I'm sure you're pretty good, after 37 years. But there was not like any crazy parties or something that you had?
No.
If you would misbehave in a monastery, what was a punishment that you could receive?
Well, there's not much latitude for misbehaving. I mean, there's only so much you can do in that kind of confined situation. But it's more like the misbehaving would come up in terms of situations with other monks where you disagree, and that's the kind of thing that would come up, And the duties that we were called upon to perform, each one of us in our different kulam families, like my kulam family was the press shop. So in the context of that work, we'd have friction amongst each other, as we tried to meet goals under a time-oriented time pressure to get goals set within a certain time deadline to produce our publications. We produced a magazine and several books and a lot of pamphlets and posters and stuff like that. And we always had a deadline, and we had to work together to achieve that deadline. And we always came into disagreements with each other about how we should do things and so forth. So that's the kind of context for problems that would come up. And if problems came up like that, all those problems were viewed as some kind of a dealing that each one of us had to do on our own with our own sense of who we thought we were, the ego. It would always come up in some sense about an ego problem. And we go on tapas. Tapas means fire, but in a practical sense, it means we go on Mauna. We'd have to wear a sign around our throat.
A sign?
Yeah, a sign, like around our neck that said, I can't talk, I'm on Mauna. So,
okay.
Yeah, it was very embarrassing because you go out and you have to have a yellow sash around your shoulders, which means you're on tapas. Yeah. And you have this, it's very embarrassing. So you don't want to go on tapas. And also it's you don't have the few liberties that we do have, you don't have when you're on tapas. You go on a special diet, you're by yourself a lot of the time, and you do more time in the temple than not. We have a procedure where everybody has a 3-hour vigil in temple. So that 24 hours a day, somebody's in the temple, and you have more temple time when you go on tapas, more alone time when you go on tapas, more special disciplines when you go on tapas, special diet when you go on tapas, sometimes fasting when you go on tapas. So that's not something anybody looks forward to, but it's also growth inducing. It's good. It's good for it's like medicine.
It's tough though. I mean, but it's good for sure, but it's tough to spend a lot of time alone with yourself without talking to someone. It's very tough, but it's very therapeutic. It's incredible what you learn out of it.
That's right.
This is a question that I actually really wonder about. Are you still able to see your family and friends once you join the monastery?
That's a good question, and that's very limited. Their family and friends can come to the monastery anytime they want to.
They can come from a visit.
Yeah, they can come for a visit anytime they want to. But your participation in that visit is very controlled. In other words, you can't go out to dinner with them, but they can come to the monastery, and they can come here and have lunch here in the monastery. I say here as if I'm there, but in the monastery, you can come to the monastery and have lunch with your son in the monastery, and spend the whole day with them in the monastery. Traveling around the monastery grounds and so forth. But you can't. It's very restricted. But you can't go to your like. I only went home 2 times in 37 years.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So, they can come here. They can come to the monastery. Yeah, that's the rule. It is strict, and that is one of the hardest things about it. But that it's all part of the training program. And our teacher used to say, when your parents come here after not having seen you for 10 years, they should not be able to recognize you. In other words, the yoga should have such an effect on you that you're not recognizable by your parents. That's the idea, and it takes a moment to kind of get absorbed into that idea, but that is part of the training.
Yeah, I can imagine that being very tough, especially in the beginning, of course. Just not seeing your friends anymore not having the chance to be together with them that much and your family. That's very tough for a lot of people. For some people, some of the monks came in from broken families, and what they were looking for was a family. They found it in the monastery, so they're not that anxious to see. No, it does depend your background.
Each person is different.
For someone who is listening, and I just have here a few questions about meditation. For someone who is listening right now and who has absolutely no idea what meditation is or what the purpose of it is, how would you explain what the meaning behind meditation is? Well, the ultimate purpose of meditation is it's the ultimate practice of the yoking of yoga. So you're trying to yoke the external sense of I into the most internal sense of I. And so that's the name of the game. That's what you're trying to do when you meditate. But the key to successful meditation is preparation for meditation. And as you know from our retreat, in Switzerland that you were there, most of the work we did was in preparation for meditation. Yes. And the idea is that meditation itself is a state. Mm-hmm. It's not something you do. It's a state of mind. It's not a practice of doing. But all the preparation for meditation is a practice of doing. That's where all the work occurs. So if you do all the preparation for meditation where all the work occurs, then you set yourself up for an easy state of meditation. If people just sit down and try to meditate and they all have the same complaint about the mind racing, that doesn't occur if you prepare for meditation correctly. You go into meditation in a calm state of mind, and all you have to do is focus there and go within. Awareness by its own volition becomes what it's aware of. So just by focusing on the bliss of being in a state of meditation, internalizes itself of its own accord until you finally get into the self that we all share. That's the idea. But the key is preparation for meditation. That's what we did in Switzerland, and you know that well. We chanted and we did a lot of breath control, and that's all in the name of preparation for meditation. Could you explain a bit what you mean with preparing to meditate? Like what kind of things you do? Well, it comes down to, to really cut to the quick and really come down to the basics. It is the Hatha yoga, which is really popular in the West. Hatha means, it has a complicated meaning, but basically it's the physical yoga. And that loosens up the tensions of the physical body. And the importance of that in the context of yoga or meditation is that the tensions of the physical body represent so-called issues that you haven't yet resolved from the subconscious mind. They create tensions in the physical body. So by going through the Hatha yoga or the physical yoga, you release those tensions, thereby releasing those psychological tensions of issues yet to be resolved, at least long enough for you to get into a meditative state. Then following that are the breath controls. And so the breath controls are the primary. Ashtanga yoga is an 8. Ashta means 8. So the original yoga or the ancient yoga from the Vedas is Ashtanga yoga, the 8-step system. The 8 steps are yamas and niyamas, do's and don'ts.
And within that is all the chanting and affirmations that we did. Remember from Switzerland? That was
Yep.
the yamas and niyamas, also the do's and don'ts, just living a good moral life, not doing certain things, doing other things instead. Then you come into the asana, that's the postures, and then pranayama, that's the breath control, and then pratyahara, which is detachment. That's the first 5 steps. 6, 7, and 8 are concentration and the meditation, and finally into samadhi. So that's the step-by-step process. But what that means in one sentence is prepare for meditation. Meditation's a piece of cake.
And isn't it a lot of also about being aware the whole day and then to meditate a couple of hours on it?
Being aware is a big part of it. And that can be easy or hard. And again, it depends on preparing for meditation. And that's one thing that Vipassana is all about, our mindfulness. Vipassana is the Sanskrit word for mindfulness. And that's something you can practice all day long. You don't have to set aside time for this. Being aware, which means that you are simply aware of where your awareness is. And if it's where you don't want it to be, then you have no reason why you can't move it.
Yeah.
If you find awareness floating into anger, there's no reason in this world why you have to stay there. You can move it. And that's the big discovery. One of the first discoveries of the practice of meditation and its ultimate sense of yoga is that you don't have to be where you find yourself to be. In other words, awareness can be controlled by the world, or you can be in control of awareness. So you have the choice.
Exactly.
Who's in control? That's the question to keep asking yourself. If somebody drives you in a conversation, if they drive you into a state of anger, what's happened? You've allowed your awareness to be pulled into the city of anger inside. And in the city of anger inside yourself, anger is all there is. But there's no reason why you can't move awareness out of that city. I mean, if you drive into San Francisco and you don't want to be in San Francisco, there's no reason why you can't just get in your car and drive away.
Definitely, yeah.
It's up to you,
You can't control what life throws at you, but you can control how you react to it.
That's it. You got it.
And
that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
The whole thing. And that's the whole training of yoga, is first of all, being aware where you are. That's the awareness part. So if you're aware of being in a place that you don't want to be, then the next step is move,
But it's understanding that that's actually something that you can do, because a lot of people don't know that you can actually move your thoughts to somewhere different.
Yeah, exactly.
There is a lot of great science showing the powerful effects of meditation. How it reduces stress and anxiety, depression, increases focus and sleep quality, and just many more benefits. Meditation is getting more mainstream, which is great as the effects are amazing. However, with that, you also come to have so many voices telling people how to meditate. And I just love to hear it from someone who is an expert in this. What technique can you recommend to someone to try out?
That's a really good question. The thing is, once you get up to the meditative stage, after you've gone through the preparation for meditation, which is the hardest part, you can go any number of ways. All roads lead to Rome, so to speak. All truth is one, paths are many. So there are different meditation techniques, according to different mindsets, according to different natures of people, according to different needs, according to where desire is at any given point in time. I mean, even myself, from day to day, I draw myself a different meditation map from one day to the next, depending on where I am in the now of each day. So there's no set rule on this, but the guideline is being very aware of where you are, or where you think you are, where you think your self is at any given point in time, and working with that self that you think you are at that point in time and going from that point. But as far as technique is concerned, the ultimate meditative technique is generally conceived across the board by all meditation experts to be self-inquiry. Mm-hmm. And the idea there is inquiry of who you think you are. So, for instance, there's a lot of talk out there about self-help.
Yep.
Right? Self-help. You've heard that, right? And
yeah.
There's all kinds of techniques for helping the self. But the big elephant in the room that nobody's talking about is who's the self that you're helping. If you
have to discover that first, yeah.
If you really figure that out, the self that's deepest inside of you, the real self that you really are deep inside yourself, needs no help.
And that's why spending time alone is actually so powerful, because that's when you can learn who you are.
Yes, and the most direct method is self-inquiry. That method is, after you've done your preparation and you're in a good feeling place, which is a blissful place. And bliss is the hallmark. Bliss tells you that you're really close to the self, because the self is blissful by nature. So if you feel bliss, you're close. And what you want to do is take that last step and go into oneness with that beautiful bliss, merge with the self. And that's the ultimate samadhi, what they call in Yoga called samadhi. That's what you're after. And coming out from that, you have to kind of remember what your problems were. You don't solve your problems. The problems go away. There's a big difference between solving problems and having the problems go away. And going away means you can't remember what the problems were. and then you really got the problem licked, so to speak, because it disappears.
Yeah.
And if you solve a problem, it's going to come back. But if the problem goes away, it's not going to come back. We're after the ultimate. And that's what self-inquiry is all about. Keep inquiring, who is this self that's having this problem? So if you say, I'm really unhappy, well, who is the self that's unhappy? Because the self within is not unhappy at all. It's blissful by nature. But if you uncover that ultimate self that we all share, you're going to be in this bliss that has no knowledge whatsoever of unhappiness. And so to answer your question, the ultimate system of meditation, once you've got past the preparation, is self-inquiry.
There are just a few more questions here on the main subject that I have, because I feel like I could keep asking questions. What is the thoughts behind the existence of a monastery?
It's kind of a situation where you have a hotbed or a greenhouse situation. It's life condensed down to a greenhouse situation, so that everything that would normally happen in life happens more quickly in the monastery. And for monks, the true motivation for being in a monastery should be you're at a place where you really want to quicken the process. Mm-hmm. You want to quicken a process that's already in progress. Life already has you in the washing machine. You're already going through a cleansing process, but just by living life. But when you get desperate in life, you get to that turning point where you really are desperate to get answers that you don't feel like you have in the moment, and you're at that point where you need some extra help. You want to quicken the process, get to the source of things and get it done. Then that's when you're ready for the monastery. It's not for everybody.
No. Well, nothing is for everyone, but yeah.
Well, there came a time where it was no longer the right thing for me. That's why I left.
During those 37 years, Muni, what was one of the hardest times or things that you have had to do in a monastery?
My 41-day water fast. 41-day water fast.
41?
Mm-hmm. 41 days water fast. Drinking only water.
Wow.
And 2 weeks before that, it was fruit and then fruit juice. Uh-huh. Fruit for 1 week, fruit juice for 1 week, and then 41 days of water. And then coming off 1 week of fruit juice and 1 week of fruit. So that was like 2.5 months of fasting.
That's incredible.
But 41 days on water, that was the hardest part. But I asked for that.
Ah, really?
Yeah, I asked for that because I thought I had this idea in my head, and it was early on in my monastic life, and I've been in the monastery maybe 8 years, and I asked for it. I said, because I had this idea, the American Indians went up on the mountain and they had a vision, and my teacher would never talk that much. He would just, instead of telling you something, he would put you in an experience that would teach you through the experience what you were asking about. So he wouldn't say, well, no, that's not fasting is not really going to help you. Instead of telling you that, he would just say, okay, let's do a fast. And then he'd let you find out for yourself whether it helped or not, So I asked for it and I got it.
Did it help you?
That's a really complicated question because
okay.
There's about four chapters in the book that I wrote that are devoted to that one experience because it was such a life-changing experience. But
which book is this of yours? Because you have two, right?
I have two. Into the Eye of All is and
that's where you wrote about this.
No, Into the Eye of All is the book, the first book that I wrote. I wrote that for myself, and it was basically all the things that I would continue doing after I left the monastery. And it's a combination of principles and practices, and
like a self-help manual for you.
For myself, yeah.
Yeah.
And in other words, it's all that I took the best and left the rest, and I wrote it in a book, and that's the book that I follow myself. That's Into the Eye of All. But the book that you're referring to, or the one that tells the experience of the fasting, is A Monk's Tale.
Ah, okay, yeah.
And A Monk's Tale is more story-oriented. It's a kind of a fun read. The other book is more like a dictionary that you use for what you need to use, and that's the way I use it. I look at the table of contents each morning when I get up, and I draw a meditation map, basically, and this is what we did in the monastery. We worked a lot with meditation maps to accomplish certain goals. And I would draw my meditation map for the day based on that book, which is my, taking the best, leaving the rest, my manual for yoga practice. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How how hard? I mean, you said like that was the hardest thing of your that you had to do in the monastery, the fasting. But did it got easier? Or, like I can imagine, like the first 2 weeks were terrible, but like did it got easier for you or?
Well, it changed very drastically in ways that you can't. The reason it's kind of hard to describe is it's not what you would expect at all.
Because I heard it's very powerful to fast.
It is, but it's kind of mixed with good and bad.
Okay.
About the first 9 to 20 days it's all about getting released from the basic desire to eat.
Yeah.
And then you switch gears into something else, and you realize, and what I realized was that your physical body is anchored down to the physical world by food. And when you stop eating food, you gradually, day by day, lose your connection or your separation from the physical to the astral.
That's interesting.
And so what I mean by that is, I'll give you an example. And this is kind of spooky the way it happens. That's why it's altogether a pleasant experience. And it's unexpected. It's not nobody could explain it to you or tell you ahead of time this is what's going to happen. But just to give you an example, I was fully awake. I was sitting up on my tatami mat, which is what we use for sleeping. It's like a straw Japanese mat on a hard floor. And I was in my room. I had a special room that was staying in for the 41 days. And I was sitting up and I thought I was in my grandmother's room. My grandmother had a big house that she rented out to students of a university nearby. So it was a big house that she rented out. And I was in one of those rooms. And which I was, the last time I was in a room like that I was like 7 or 8 years old. I was in this room and I was fully awake, and I could look around the walls. I could see the certain pictures on the wall. I had the smell of the room. I could remember the smell of the room, the look of the bed, the feeling of the bed. Everything in the room is totally real. And the door opened, and I thought my grandmother would be walking through the door, and it was Gurudeva, my teacher. And the second my teacher walked into the room morphed into the actual room that I was in. I realized that I was not asleep at all. I was not dreaming. But for all intents and purposes, it seemed like a dream. It seemed like I was in this dream of being in my grandmother's room, which I was not. I was fully awake in this room that I wasn't aware of being in until my teacher walked into the room. And the room itself morphed back, and I realized I wasn't asleep at all. I was fully awake. So what happens is the waking and the sleeping, there's no separation. So I thought I was not sleeping anymore. But people would walk into my room, and they would think I was laying there sleeping. But as far as I was concerned, I was having a dream. I couldn't tell waking from dreaming. And
that's interesting.
And there's and the net sum total of the effect of that is you don't feel grounded. So whatever spiritual experience that you have in the midst of all that, and I did have a spiritual experience, but it didn't feel grounded, didn't feel comfortable, it didn't feel reassuring. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. If you think back on your life, and when you had mystical experiences, you would go out of your normal state of consciousness and come back into your normal state of consciousness. And your normal state of consciousness, although it's not really real in the sense of being your deepest inner self, it's what you're used to. And because you're used to it, you feel comfortable there. And so when you have an unusual experience, which is you perceive to be a good experience, you go away from what you're used to and you have this good experience, you come back to what you're used to. What you're used to may not be nearly as beautiful as what you just experienced, but it's what you're used to. And it's your point of stability, right? And
yeah.
That's what you lose when you fast. You lose that point of stability. So you're just a loose cannon. I mean, you're like a ship on the ocean without an anchor, and you're looking for food to anchor you down.
Yeah.
And that's the experience of it. And as nearly as I can just encapsulate in a kind of an example.
That's so interesting to hear. And yeah, I've been reading also a bit about fasting, and I would love to give it a try actually at some point.
In the midst of that, you can have deeply mystical experiences, but under other conditions where you're eating and so forth, you can always come back to that so-called normal state of consciousness and then review your inner experience and say, "Wow, that was wonderful." Mm-hmm. But you don't have that go-to place that you can come back to and look from that place back on the experience and say, "Wow, that was really great." And from that, I can kind of see where people who are clinically insane, they are in this constant place of not being able to settle down into a home base of some sort. And people think, well, wow, this guy's crazy. And he is crazy. He's crazy because he has no settling down place where he can just perch. And people can say, okay, there's Muni. Hi, Muni. How you doing, man? So that's why you can't really rush this experience too much, this spiritual evolution, so to speak. The monastery is kind of geared toward taking you along step by step at a pace and a speed that you can tolerate.
Yeah, that's because today it's like we always want things like instantly, like with the internet and everything, and you can't, like, you have to take small steps in everything.
And that's the impetus, but taking drugs, taking psychedelic drugs, you don't want to rush everything along. You don't want to rush things. You want to take it piece by piece. There's a certain wisdom there.
Muni, today you're not in the monastery anymore. How many years was that ago that you left?
10 years.
10 years. And why did you leave? What was your reason for leaving?
Well, complicated. It's more than one reason. My teacher died in 2001, and I died. I died. I didn't die. I'm still here. I left in
hopefully.
I left in 2007, so I stayed for 6 years more. But one of the main reasons I left was my teacher died. And I came into the monastery to study with him, and when he left, I wanted to leave too, basically.
Yeah, okay.
And a lot of other monks did too. But at the same time, I also met the woman that would eventually become my wife, and you've met her.
Yeah.
And she was on a inner search program. Every 2 years we do what we call inner search, INNERSEARCH, inner search program around the world, about 5 weeks, and we go to different places. We always go to India, usually to Europe in some fashion, and around the world back to Hawaii where we start. And we do that every 2 years, and we take about 100 people. And so she was on the trip that we took in 2004, and I was one of the teachers on that trip, and that's how we met in the first place. And over the next 3 years following that, we developed a relationship, which you would think wouldn't happen normally, but it did. And that was part of the reason also why I left. So it's a combination of factors, more than one thing.
Yeah, but I'm happy. I'm very happy for you, for you guys.
I'm very happy now.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I know I made the right decision, because of...
Yeah. And probably because you also felt kind of maybe more ready to maybe take another chapter or something.
Oh yeah, for sure. In fact, right up to the end, we talked on the phone, Mary Beth and I did, and I was saying right up to the end, I think I should stay here. It's my duty is to stay here. And she says, fine, yeah, if you think you should stay, you should stay. And at the last minute, I just had this impulse to really go, and I did. And it was the best decision I ever made. This is my third life in this life.
It's many times good to follow that impulse. What did you struggle with in the beginning, or had difficulties with adjusting to the life outside once you left?
Oh, another good question. Well, the first thing was making money.
Making money?
Yeah, making money, because I never had to think about that in the monastery. And when I was a working musician, it seems like everything just happened naturally. When I was a working musician, everything just kind of fell in my lap, and I never had to worry about money. I always had enough. And in the monastery, that was always taken care of. Although we had an 8-hour job in the monastery, we never had to think about money because it was taken care of. And so that was a new thing to have to think about. But
That's interesting.
It's interesting. But the thing is, now I'm doing exactly what I want to do, and
that's cool.
And I'm making money from doing it, and everything is fine. And I find that when I think too much about money, things get out of balance, and I have a problem. If I really, follow the natural forces and everything works well. So that was one big adjustment, was having to think about money. And then now money's not a problem anymore, so I'm not thinking about that so much. Also, there's a lot of, the subconscious mind is just a habit mind, right? So you get used to the habit of living in the monastery. So a huge adjustment coming out of the monastery is developing a whole new set of habits.
I can't imagine, because that must be so crazy.
And you could almost say I'm almost agoraphobic in the sense that I just don't want to leave the house. And so naturally I set up what I call my Zen Den. It's my yoga studio, which is like 30 steps from my house. It's our 2-car garage that's converted into a yoga studio where I spend most of my day outside of my house. So I have it set up so I don't have to leave my property. But I'm getting more and more accustomed to driving and getting out and around. But that was a big challenge,
because I can't, like, for 37 years being used to a more simplistic lifestyle, and then coming to here where everything is just moving around constantly, that must be so hard. And
simplistic is one thing, but cloistered is another. And the cloistered
also,
cloistered, like, keep in mind, I was not allowed to speak to women, you know, in the cloistered monastery, I was not allowed to speak to women except in certain very controlled situations, you know, like when teaching or when you're giving a lecture or doing a seminar or doing some kind of a yoga retreat or something. Otherwise, you know, I was not allowed to talk to women on a casual basis or to be alone with a woman. You know, if you're alone with a woman, you have to have a second monk there. And, so it was very strict, you know, and all of a sudden all that went away. And I remember when I first came out of the monastery, I went to, we spent about 3 years in Ohio, then we came down here to Charleston. And here in Charleston, everybody hugs each other. Everybody hugs. So you
all of a sudden, 100 girls.
You talk to a person, and you've never met the person. You've talked to them for like 15 minutes and say, "Okay, I got to go." And before they go, they give you a big hug. You know, so I had to get used to that.
What is actually the reason that you can communicate with girls, like that there are no other girls among the guys in the monastery?
When I first came in, there was also a nunnery.
Okay.
It was a place for nuns and also for monks. And the whole reason is really simple. They don't want you to, you know, develop a relationship with a woman because that would put out of the monastery. That's exactly what happened to me. I'm a good case in point, you know.
Well, I mean, you took 37 years, so you got pretty far.
That's right. But that's basically the reason why. I mean, because you can't. Yeah. There's a long description, which is in both of my books, actually, what happens when you start to develop a relationship with a woman, especially if you have sex with a woman. There's a certain ka, or astral attachment that gets established between a man and a woman. So you have to be really careful about that. And through that attachment, you can communicate internally with that person. So there are all kinds of safeguards to stop that from happening between a man and a woman, also a man and a man. You know, so it's all about. We had a no touching policy. You couldn't touch other monks. So it's all very important for you to keep to yourself and not, you know, because certain things happen the second you touch somebody. A current gets established of connection between the two people, and depending on the degree of the touching, whether it's intimate or not, you know, that connection can last for 24 hours or 12 years. You know,
it's true.
Yeah. So. That's the whole reason why it's all based on mystical reasons that have to be really explained, and you have to kind of meditate on the whole process to kind of get the whole thing and understand why it's important. But
because it sounds like everyone is just focusing on themselves and not on someone else's life.
Yes, exactly, and self, not in a selfish way, because you know,
no.
If you're focusing on yourself in an egotistical way, that's selfish. But you're focusing on yourself as in going in the process of yoga, where you go in to realize the self of yourself. You know, merging with the self that we all share. There's a self that we all, this oneness that flows in and through all things. That's what you're after in the ultimate meditative experience. If you're after that, that's not selfish at all. That's going for the self that we all share, and that's the opposite of selfishness. That's selflessness. The big difference between selfish and selfless.
There definitely is. Muni, with that final question, I already want to thank you so much for sharing that inner wisdom of yours, because it's so much valued and appreciated. And you definitely need to send me a photo of you, how you looked back then when you were a monk, because when I saw the photo on your phone, it was such a difference how you look now and back then.
Oh, yeah.
And I will put the photo on the show notes for everyone listening to check out, because it's quite incredible. Muni, before we finish this interview, there are a few end questions that I ask every guest here on the show. And the first one is, your parents' influence. What do you feel that your parents taught you well while you were growing up?
My parents were really, really influential. My mother in particular was a very spiritual person. She used to, instead of reading me bedtime stories, like I have 4 brothers, she would read us from Edgar Cayce. Do you know who that is?
Edgar Cayce. No, I don't know.
He was a psychic, and he was one of the early psychics way back in the 1950s and 40s. He was one of the first kind of spiritual people that got out there. And so she used to read me from that book, you know, when I was 8 or 9 or 10 years old. She was very mystical. And so my dad was too. My dad, by the way, was a research scientist, and he worked with Oppenheimer on the Manhattan Project. He helped develop the atom bomb.
Oh, God.
I mean, that's not...
Wow.
He's just a scientist working working with chemicals and stuff. But I was born I was the firstborn in our family, and I was born in New York City because that's where he was working. Mm-hmm. And then we moved down to Tennessee, to the University of Tennessee. He taught, but he also was liaison with Oak Ridge, where they developed the atom bomb. And to this day, they're still researching atomic energy there in that place, and that's why we moved there in Tennessee. So my dad was very forward thinking and helped to create the atom bomb. Sounds like not a most mystical thing, but that he was a scientist. Scientists think a certain way. But my mom was also a mathematician. That's how they met. Actually, they met working on that project in Manhattan, and then I was the first one born when they got married. So it was under their influence, and believe it or not, they were very mystical people, and that was a good influence to start with. And I think everything that I'm doing now stems from that. I can't help but believe that's true.
Yeah, how our parents raise us, it influences how we become.
Yeah, but as I mentioned before, a lot of the monks came from broken families, so it can.
But that's also an influence, right? But just in another way.
Yeah, another way. So there are different ways,
What would you have liked your parents to have taught you differently?
You know what? I can't think of one thing that they could have done differently that would have been better. To be honest, I'd have to think about that for a while, because they didn't spank. They weren't harsh. They weren't. Their way of teaching was very indirect in terms of not being forceful and always pulling on you for your insights and not forcing stuff on you.
That's good.
Yeah.
If any, which book do you consider to be your personal Bible, or any books that has had a big impact on your life?
Well, what we're taught is that everything we practice comes from the Vedas, which is 3,500 years old, but that's not a very useful text, because even Sanskrit scholars can't read the Vedas now, because it's the Sanskrit language itself has changed so much through the years. But I think the most practical thing, and the book that we could refer to people listening in, is the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali. That's a real popular book out there. The Yoga Sutras by Patanjali. Also, I Am That by Nisargadatta. He's a very renowned teacher about self-inquiry, actually.
Okay.
Those two books are really good.
I'll put them on the show notes.
Yeah.
Are there any favorite quotes that you have at the moment, or any quote that just recently that you read that you liked?
Well, from my teacher, just right off the top of my head, realize the self yourself. Realize the self yourself, and pull the self you think you are back into the self that we all share. That's the only reason you're born, as my teacher said. The only reason you're born here on earth is to realize the self yourself.
Final two questions here, Muni. What words of wisdom, what advice has helped you through your life?
Oh, face yourself. Face the self that you think you are.
Yeah.
And by facing that self and acknowledging that, you become very humble. And humble is letting go of humility is letting go of the self you think you are for the self that you really are. And that's what humility really is all about. So anything regarding humility is essential to the big lesson of life. Life batters you around until you become humble. That's really what happens through life. Isn't that true for you? I mean, it's true for everybody, right?
Yeah, and facing yourself, I totally agree with that. And there's so many people who just don't dare to do that. And I kind of feel it.
Life forces that.
Yeah, but still, you can still somehow always try to go around it by.
Yeah, right.
And I kind of find it too bad, because when you actually do get to know who you are, you start to see your own uniqueness. And I think that's actually very beautiful when you start to see that.
You know what? That's really interesting. You should bring that up, because my teacher said, and this seems counterintuitive, but my teacher used to say that the deeper in you go, the more unique you become. And you would think, well, now by logic, you would think that doesn't make sense, because you're trying to go into the self we all share. That should mean that you're becoming more and more the same, right? But what you do as you face your ego, by that simple facing of the ego, you break it down piece by piece. You come into basically an unspoken or unrealized knowledge of all the stuff that you've gained through many lives, all the skills that you've developed through many lives, and you see the uniqueness that you've developed through many lives of reincarnation. You've developed so many talents.
Before I ask the final question here, Muni, what keeps you busy these days, and where can people find and connect with you?
I'm right now. I'm really involved in my artwork. It just so happens I'm doing that right now. In fact, right before.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so you can go on my website, yogawithmuni.com, and see what I'm doing. I've got 2 books out, and I'm doing a lot of artwork, and I'm teaching yoga and meditation classes individually and privately, and as a group and in groups. And that's what I'm doing, and I'm doing it right here on my property in my Zindan, and I'm very happy.
Were there also online yoga classes?
I'm trying to get up Skype situations like this. In fact, you remember Doris?
Yeah.
Doris from the Switzerland thing. Well, we've been having classes on Skype classes like this.
That's cool.
Yeah. So I'm trying to set that up on a regular basis, but I'm in the process of getting that set up. And the only problem is Skype occasionally dropping off, like it did for us here during the session. That's the only problem. But I am trying to set that up. It's just in the making right now.
Yeah, because that's definitely something that I can see becoming more popular through the years. I link your website on the show notes so everyone can find your website on there. And the final question here, Muni, from everything that you've seen, experienced, lived, and learned in your life, what is the one thing you know to be true?
I think the one thing that I know to be true is the process that I, to this day, keep performing from my life in the monastery, which is this yoking of yoga. This is the one truth is this ultimate samadhi that I'm after, that I have experienced, and I want to experience again and again. Maybe this is a good chance to kind of talk about that just for a moment.
Sure.
Going into the ultimate experience of samadhi, that's the thing I consider the most important thing. I gear my whole life around that. That's the only thing I really consider important, because everything else of importance in my life relates to that in some fashion, including my life with Mary Beth. She's very much part of this whole process and helpful in that sense. We're like 2 sides of a coin. And this ultimate destination and goal of life, if you want to say a goal or a meaning of life, is what keeps me going. I mean, that really is it. Everything revolves around that. And if I miss my morning time that we describe, from 3 to 7, or any semblance of that when I practice, when I travel, for instance, I really miss it. And I depend on it. I'm a junkie for that. So that's the most important thing, is the experience of getting in as far as I can. And every morning is different, because the forces of life change. Your now is different every morning. So it's not like I just on clockwork go into the self and come out, but some mornings are better than others. But the attempt is what is the most important thing.
Exactly.
And that's what my whole life revolves around. That it's the most important thing.
Muni, I thank you so much for taking the time here to share your wisdom with everyone. It's much appreciated, and I absolutely loved it. Thank you just so much. There we have it, guys. Hope you enjoyed this interview with Muni Natarajan. For show notes and more, simply go to innerpicturestories.com/podcast and type in Muni in the search bar, and this episode will pop right up with everything that we talked about and more. Don't forget, if you found this episode helpful, be sure to share it with all your friends and family on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, etc. Help me spread this wisdom around. And with that, I thank you so much for spending some time here with me and Muni, and I wish you an absolutely amazing day out there. Until next time, this is Jelis Vaz signing off.